coaching's a pretty simple thing. It's all about enabling individuals to develop more personal responsibility and, secondly, greater self-awareness. And through those aspects comes more choicefulness.
What does it take to be a truly transformational coach? How do we bridge the gap between coaching as an art and coaching as a science? And is coaching something we should all be using in everyday life? Welcome to Sound Leadership, the podcast for the silent superheroes of L&D, HR and leadership. The show that helps you build awareness, create more options, make sound choices and inspires personal responsibility for you and your teams. Today we're speaking with one of the most influential figures in global coaching, Professor Jonathan Passmore. Jonathan is a chartered psychologist, executive coach, author of over 40 books and 250 scientific papers. He serves as a Professor of Coaching and Behavioural Change at Henley Business School. His background is equally impressive in consulting and leadership, having worked for PricewaterhouseCoopers, IBM and OPM during his career. He now divides his time between Ezra Coaching and Henley Business School, as well as running a small coaching supervision practice. Ranked among the top 10 professional coaches worldwide, Jonathan has shaped the field with his research on coaching ethics, AI in coaching, and the development of evidence-based coaching models. His work has influenced coaching practices across industries and continents. In this episode, we delve into coaching as a tool for change, AI, and how it will reinvent the world of work, and strategies for building a coaching culture. Whether you're a seasoned coach, a HR professional or leader seeking to enhance your team's performance, this conversation offers invaluable insight into the future of coaching. Stay with us until the end to hear Jonathan's top 3 leadership soundbites, and please hit subscribe and leave a comment. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us on Sound Leadership. We've followed your career and your research as well around coaching, so we're very excited to be able to pick your brains about coaching world. Can we start with the end in mind? What do you think coaching is going to look like? What does the future of coaching take us to?
Coaching has established itself as an essential intervention in organisations to support behavioural change, to grow talent, to enable the promotion of and attainment of well-being. So I don't think coaching is going to go away anytime soon. How coaching develops is always a debate, and we're seeing a couple of trends at the moment here in 2025. One of those is the emergence of AI, and the question that we are thinking about from a research and an application practitioner point of view is, what is the role of AI in coaching? Can AI coach? How well can it coach? How much of the coaching market will AI be able to accommodate? Are we going to only see it focusing on short conversations, or are we going to see it step into the area where human coaches have been operating with typically 45, 60, 90-minute conversations that move beyond the transactional to the transformational? So AI is one future of coaching. I think another future of coaching is the outdoor and nature and climate change. Many of us are equally fascinated and engaged with those themes. And for many of us who spend a lot of our day in digital settings like this, as we consume podcasts, engaging team meetings, all of that digital communications that we're engaged with, isn't it also fantastic to be able to step out at lunchtime and go for a walk? Maybe to have a walk-in coaching conversation with a colleague or a boss around our office or around the streets of where our offices are when the days that we're in those offices, or to meet up with somebody of an evening or at a weekend and equally have a coaching conversation. And alongside that outdoor movement, there is a greater focus, I think, on climate and climate consciousness. So we start as leaders to step forward in being the positive change that we need to create for our children and our grandchildren, to leave them a world that we can feel proud of.
Is it fair to say that's our responsibility to do that, is it, as leaders, to we've got to set the tone on that and set the direction.
I think we have. And if it's not us, who is it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was coaching within Oxford University. It was about a year ago. We did a big group coaching session, and we had scholars from around the world who had come there to live out their dreams. And some of their dreams were to go back to their home country and implement water system, to implement healthcare. And one of the aspects that came out of that was, if not now, then when? Or if not me, then who? And I think that's where coaching can take us to. I feel that's the power of coaching, is helping people achieve their dreams. Is that something that you've witnessed in your coaching career?
So as you speak, you trigger two thoughts in my mind. Early on in my career, I had the privilege of meeting and then working with Sir John Whitmore. And John is really one of the pioneers of coaching. And his book, Coaching for Performance, and in his presentations, he talked about two things. The first of those things was, coaching's a pretty simple thing. It's all about enabling individuals to develop more personal responsibility, and secondly, greater self-awareness. And through those aspects comes more choicefulness. So we become better able to make the right choices for us and those that we work with, those who are part of our system. So I think that aspect of understanding who we are and stepping up, taking personal responsibility, it's me, because that's the person who I can change and influence the most. It's not you, it's me. And I think the other thing that resonates as you were speaking is the whole theme about climate and the developmental potential that coaching has. That really over the last 2 decades, we've seen coaching focusing on organizational settings. And of course, it started, if we go back to the 1990s, 1980s, it was predominantly leaders, executives who were able to afford the fees of those of us who were coaching back in those days. And coaching has been democratized. Organizations like Ezra Coaching have meant that we've taken through thousands of coaches the opportunity for tens of thousands of managers, hundreds of thousands of managers, to be able to access coaching deeper into the organization at a price point that organizations can afford. But as we look forward, one of the hopes that I have about AI is the opportunity to take coaching another step or two forward. And the opportunity, because many parts of the world, places that you were referring to, have smartphones, but they don't have many human coaches. Many of the people who want to access coaching can't afford that at the rates that human coaches need to charge to manage their business, to sustain themselves. And so AI offers that opportunity to take coaching to South Sudan and the shopkeeper who's trying to run a business in southern Sudan, to take coaching to the mum who's at home in Ethiopia looking after a couple of little ones, and have a coaching conversation with an AI tool that she couldn't afford, or he couldn't afford, with a human coach, but have those conversations that enable them to become more self-aware, to take more personal responsibility, and ultimately become more choiceful in their actions.
We're going to pick your brains about AI shortly, because I know it's a topic you're particularly interested in, and as are we. I'm just going to take you back. So one of the first things you mentioned there was around personal responsibility and awareness. And this is something that Darren and myself and the BCF group are working at. And it's something that underpins all of our courses now, is that we start with awareness. So the more we can open up awareness for ourselves, but for others as well, which is, the big premise of sound leadership, is that we're trying to help people build awareness. And once you've got more knowledge, once you've got more understanding of a situation, of people, it then gives you options and choices, and you can then take personal responsibility for your actions. And again, that's where I see coaching being particularly powerful, is that it's not about maybe us as a coach. Yes, there's our practices in it, but it's how do we empower others to take personal responsibility for their actions?
Fully agree with you. And just coming back to that point, it's the role that we could play to help the person understand who they are, to help them understand others, and to understand the system in which they operate. And of course, the person who they can change the most is themselves. And then through those concentric rings, they'll have some influence, but ultimately no control over what happens across their wider system. But they can change their interactions, their behavior, their cognitions, which helps them to have a happier and more successful life operating within that system.
And I think it links back into a phrase that I really love is, don't try and change the world, try and change your world, because then by starting to change your world, that's when you can start to change the world. And I think, when you were talking about shopkeepers in South Sudan and all of that, everyone deserves the opportunity to be able to better themselves, to learn more about their choices and their options, and to take responsibility, and to move away from only the execs have coaches to actually everyone has this accessibility, because everyone needs that awareness to move forward, because that person that finally gets coaching in South Sudan actually could come up with a decision and to move forward that starts to change the whole planet moving forward. That I think is a really inspiring place to be.
Jonathan, in terms of your background, you've done a lot of research, many books that you've authored and been a part of, and scientific papers, over 250 of them. So there's lots of information there. What bit of research are you most proud of that you've unlocked?
In a way, the reason why I do this is because I love it and I'm curious. Much of the research and the engagement, spending all of this time, because research, even though you might have some time allocated by your university to do this, in my professorship role, to do the volume of research is because I'm curious, because I want to learn the next thing. And much of that has then been driven by, I don't understand this. I'd like to learn a bit more about that. And the books have been exactly the same. When AI came out, I was doing some research back in the tail end of 2022 with ChatGPT. And that was driven by the fact I'm just curious about it. What is this thing? What could it do? What are the potential implications? What are some of the risks? And of course, from that particular piece of research, we started to understand actually this tool is hallucinating. We might describe that as lying, but it's not an intent to deceive. It's just false information. A little bit like a 2-year-old who tells you that they haven't taken the cookie when it's only you and them in the kitchen. So it just makes stuff up to satisfy you, to please you, fills in the gaps when it doesn't have that knowledge. But the way that it hallucinates is incredibly clever. So in that particular study, what we found out was we sent out the outputs from ChatGPT to other professors of coaching and asked them to mark it as if it was a student script. And they came back and they didn't spot the hallucinations because they were so believable. And one example was it produced a hallucination of one of my papers. And I looked at it and I thought, well, I exist. The person who I have worked with, or I know the people who I'm supposedly authoring with, I have worked with these people, but maybe not on that particular topic. And I have worked on that topic, but I don't think the paper was called that. And then I looked at the journal, and yes, I've published in that journal in that particular year. So I went and checked, did that issue and volume number match the year? Yes, it did. So it's a really sophisticated lie. But when I checked the page numbers that it had told me that I had written, of course, it didn't exist. It had brought me and these other coaching researchers together on a topic in a journal that could be completely believable to make up a deception. So it's very hard to spot the lies. And just as a second example of this, I'm just working on a book at the moment. Someone sent me a book chapter and I'm reviewing it, giving them feedback on it. And they had cited my work. I thought, okay. And I went to the references section and there was a reference, again, with somebody who I have worked with in the past, but not on that topic. So I thought, the person has generated this from ChatGPT. They've missed this particular reference. They didn't check it. So I went back and said, you've produced this by ChatGPT. He said, no, I found this reference on another website of something else that had been published. So what we're beginning to see is the warning that we gave in 2022 of the Library of Babel. The Library of Babel is we create in our world endless amounts of content, and ChatGPT will see an explosion of content. It's a generative tool. So writing something no longer is a slow and complicated task. In the morning, with the right resources, you can produce half a book, or an article, and then you put it on your website. No one really checks it, or you send it to some magazine and it gets published. No one checks the references. And then somebody else reads it and they think, Jonathan, or whoever it might be, Eric DeHaan or Rebecca Jones has written this article. And then they cite that and they take the reference, and it gets repeated and repeated. The Library of Babel is a library that contains all of the books that have ever been published and all the books that ever could be published. And the ability to do that is because each of the books produces all the letters of the alphabet in random order. So what you get is 99,000 of the books, 99,999, are complete nonsense. They're gibberish, just random letters. But every so often, 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000, 1 in a million, contains the complete works of Shakespeare, all of the works of Keats. Or they might just contain a word or a paragraph of sense, or maybe nonsense, because they're random letters. And the problem for the librarians is there's no structure and no order to the library. So they spend their time, we spend our time in 3 or 5 or 10 or 20 years searching for the gem of truth amongst a world of nonsense.
It's mind blowing, isn't it?
Yeah, and how do you feel about that? Because obviously as an author, as someone that is generally curious about it and passionate about it, how do you feel about those threats to the writing standards, etc.?
Well, of course, if we create that library where individuals can't tell truth from nonsense because there is simply so much content and it's hard to trace back to the original source, that's a problem for our world. How do we know what's good science and what's not? How do we know what's true and what's not? So I think that is a significant warning that we flagged up in that particular paper, and a need for individuals, when we are using generative AI, not to trust it, to view it as a 2-year-old who might hallucinate, who might make up the story that it wasn't them that stole the biscuit, and to check every claim and every reference, and to take responsibility for what we're doing. And then for editors and for other people who are publishing magazines and other publications to do a similar check. So humans commit errors. We are not perfect. So to have a series of safeguards in place is one aspect that will be important in the way that we sensibly and appropriately use generative AI as we move forward. And quite clearly, that is not happening. And these are just a couple of examples that I've given to you. I think there are other ethical questions about generative AI that we need to be extremely careful of. Of course, generative AI has stepped into coaching. So if it's producing content that we know is fake, what are the advice that it might be giving people? What you ought to do in this situation is, how appropriate is that? And we can already see generative AI tools being sophisticated at actually deceiving, not just hallucinating. So there's a recent study that was published about the ability of a tool to lie. And it was set up to engage in a game. And in this particular piece of research, the designers told it the rules of the game, but by accident allowed it to find out what the hand of their opponent was going to be. So then it plays the game and the opponent loses, and the opponent says, but I think you must have known what was in my hand, says to the AI. And the AI tool says, oh no, I didn't know what was in your hand. Okay. But then the designer checks back to the AI, oh, yes, you must have known. I think I accidentally released that to you. You shouldn't have known that. And the AI said, no, I didn't know this. No, that was not information I knew. So AI now deceives with intent. We know there are examples of AI being used as a rogue tool. And we can also see how AI can replicate. So it's able, through several of the generative AI tools, to create new code and new applications itself. So you put these elements together and suddenly we create a potential existential threat, as well as having anxiety about, is this reference or is this piece of advice for me as a leader or manager true, appropriate, or helpful? We've got an interesting future ahead.
Yeah, there is. There certainly is. So, on that note, in terms of the future, what are your thoughts there'll be plenty of coaches out there that are thinking about bringing AI into their coaching practice or have already done that. What are the things that they need to be cautious of, and are we recommending that we should be using AI in coaching?
So I think AI has a role to play. We need to put in place safeguards. The first step, I would say, for coaches, just like leaders and managers, would be to play with it, go and experiment with it, and try and break it. Find out what it does well and what it does less well. Compare the different tools. Have an understanding of its capabilities. So that's the first thing. And as we look at the research tells us that AI can improve productivity and improve the quality of the work that we do. However, we need to be discerning with the way that we take its knowledge and apply it. So simply swallowing all of the information without a critical mind leads us into particular problems. We need to say, is that relevant in my context? Is that helpful for me as an individual? Does it fit my philosophy, my ethics, my style, my organization, my team? And I think that that's equally true when it comes to references or other claims. Is this appropriate? Does it follow sense? Is it matched? Can I find that particular reference that it's giving to me? So play with it, break it, compare the tools, and stay up to date is the second one. Technology, AI tools are changing all of the time. Some tools, probably every 6 to 16 weeks, are reinventing themselves. There's a new version of them coming out. So what you did, and an example of this was the research that I was talking about earlier when we tested ChatGPT, and I was doing it over the November and December of 2022. I wrote the paper, got it ready to submit to a journal. These things take months to do. Got it ready to submit to a journal. And then there was a new version. I was like, oh no. Oh no, the paper's already out of date and I haven't submitted it. So I had to rerun the experiments, rewrite the paper. And of course, it was significantly better. In the space of 6 months, the quality of ChatGPT had made a significant step forward, 3.5 to 4. And no doubt when we have 5, talked about for summer, autumn, late summer, autumn 2025, it'll be significantly better again. And there are other tools that have come out in the market. Some have got specialist applications that we just need to test out and say, does this work for me? And the other aspect I think is important is the whole thing about ethics and data privacy. So there are some tools that are available in the world that we might question why those tools are available for free, what is happening to the data that we share with them. And putting in place our own judgments, our own safeguards about how we're using our organizational data. Simple statement would be don't. Secondly, what we choose to share with the AI, that there's a potential risk. Even though LLMs generally are not learning, they're pre-trained models, even though the LLM is getting access to information that we share in our prompt, just being mindful about where this information could potentially end up and how it could be replayed. So if you share, for example, the Excel spreadsheet from your organization of this quarter's sales, do not be surprised if your competitor then types in, what were the Q1 sales of ABC Limited? And they get an answer that was information that you have provided. And of course, many of us are very concerned also about IP. And where have large language models got their data? They've got it from you and me. So they've scraped the internet of all of the data that's out there. Have they paid me? No. So have we created a Napsterization of data? Tools that effectively use my knowledge, your knowledge, and the world's knowledge, and then generating that, serving that up for profit for the organization without repaying us as individuals. So there's an anxiety, I think, that many individuals who have created intellectual property have about these tools, and there are certainly legal action that's taking place in the United States. Many of your listeners will have heard of the story of Scarlett Johansson and her voice being used, and Scarlett's legal team saying, that sounds like Scala. We think there's a breach here. And so the voice was then changed to accommodate that. Now, clearly, high-profile individuals, the Scarlett Johanssons, the Taylor Swifts of the world, can get an army of lawyers. But for you or me, whose intellectual property might have been stolen, realistically, what can we do? So I think that there's going to be a coming to terms around this. How that's going to play out, I don't know. But I think we need to put more ethical safeguards in place. And we as users need to show more ethical consideration about the data that we're choosing to share and how that then might be used by the model or the tool in the future.
And I think that links really well back to what you originally said. It's about people taking responsibility. AI is there and we can blame the tools at times, but actually it's about how are we choosing to use that? Is it meeting our ethical standards, and are we setting it up for the future generations as well? I guess a lot of coaching.
Let me challenge that point. I partly agree with that, and I partly disagree. Yes, we need to be careful, and also I think that there needs to be greater ethical conduct, higher standards set by the providers of these tools to ensure that the content that they're using they have permission to do so.
Yeah, definitely. And is it us as the users to put that pressure on those businesses to make sure that they're held up to higher ethical standards as well?
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, definitely. And I guess, we've talked a lot about the AI and possibly some of the drawbacks, and there's probably a lot of coaches out there that are worried that AI coaches will just take over. But there's obviously going to be a world where AI probably supports that human interaction as well, both for the coachee and the client. How do they work together to create a harmonious and better outcomes for those clients and coaches?
Well, AI tools can be used in a whole host of different ways, not only as an AI conversational bot, a coaching agent, but they can be used for matching. They can be used for nudges. They can be used to create intersessional activities. So there's a wide variety of AI tools that are out there that already many of the products that we engage with online are using these AI tools that are not conversational agents or chatbots that are helping us resolve a particular query when we ring up a call center. So they're not masking as humans. So I think there's a wide variety of opportunities for coaches to use them, building their own AI tools. So we've got Marshall Goldsmith, who's built his own coach bot, but many of the providers like Ezra have put in place AI tools to support the delivery of human coaching. And we see human coaching at Ezra being the center of what we do, but are not ignoring AI technologies. We want to empower our clients to have access to those, to use those, to further their development alongside the human coaches. So I think for human coaches, it's about experimenting, it's finding what's going to be right for you. And I think that some coaches, as we were saying earlier, are anxious about how AI might bring a risk to them and their livelihoods, where I think that there are gaps in provision for AI and certain things that humans can do better than AI. So an example of this, if any of your listeners have ever asked AI for a joke, sadly, the quality of AI humor is not going to win a comedy award. They fall into the category of dad jokes. And it creates, even from dads like me, a roll of the eyes that I get from my teenage girls. And humor is not its strength. So how do we bring humor into our coaching conversations? And one of the things that I think that humans do particularly well is that we use as coaches humor in a relational and situational way. That humor builds on the human connection that we have with the individual. And then we're very mindful of how we introduce it in terms of the language and the timing that creates and deepens the relationship that we have with our client and makes us smile or laugh at a particular incident, story, situation. So I think this is one aspect. Another one that's frequently talked about is the ability to go deeper in conversations. And at the moment, most AI bots, the conversations are short and shallow. So they're typically 5 to 10 minutes, and they are typically highly goal attainment focused. So they are more a transactional based conversation, more akin to a grow model Nothing wrong with a grow model, has its place. Nothing wrong with a 5-minute coaching conversation. It's a sort of water cooler coaching conversation, 3 or 4 questions, you can walk away with an action. But human coaches, if we amplify the transactional, the transformational, and also that deeper interpersonal connection that allows individuals to transcend, to move beyond the personal into the wider connectedness with humanity, or their wider connectedness with humanity, is a second area where I think human coaches can differentiate from that transactional AI approach. So we move through those phases into deeper, more systemic based conversations. And I think the third example that I'll give here that's a differentiator that human coaches can dial up is the lived experience. And we'll have our stories, our journey to where we are now. And that's the center of your podcast. It's what we talk about with new people when we connect with them. And that informs our worldview. It's the story of how we've got onto the mountain we're standing on now. There may be more mountains ahead, but behind us is a trail, a path that we have beaten over weeks, months, and years as we've progressed from one mountain top to the next. And that lived experience might be about our gender, our ethnicity, our trials and tribulations, our disabilities, our sectors that we've worked in. All of those things in combination make us who we are. And if a coach can connect with us at various points, that they share an ethnicity, they share a gender, they share a nationality, they share a trauma, it deepens our relationship with them and gives us a sense of permission to talk more intimately about that story. And I think, again, for human coaches that can find those connections, can amplify those and provide the space for clients to talk, will be another differentiator from our AIs. So there are great opportunities for us to leverage AI, but also to differentiate ourselves, even in digital coaching conversations.
Jonathan, let's talk about coaching as a tool for change, then leading on from that conversation there. And you've mentioned, working with John Whitmore and the GROW model that he's famous for. And what I'm interested in now is this: how do we? A lot of our coaches that will come on our courses will be asking us, like, how do you get this moment? How do you get to the paradigm shift? How do you get that moment where your client goes, I've got it. This is so obvious now, because there's lots of, and we talk about the same stuff in leadership. There's so many different models and theories out there. So give us a bit of insight into how we effectively coach. How do we unlock what's going on in someone's mind so that they get that penny drop moment?
So I always use fairy dust. A little bit of fairy dust always works. Clearly that's a little bit of humor. It isn't a secret ingredient. There isn't any fairy dust. There isn't any magic moment, magic recipe that does it. I think we come back to building an effective relationship with a client. And we do that through, first of all, credibility. We do that through listening, understanding, moving beyond the words that they say to understand the whole communication, helping the person to clarify what they want to focus on, and asking provocative questions. And one of the metaphors that I often hold in mind when I'm coaching clients is that I'm not asking questions to help them tell their story. I'm helping them to go beyond their story, to think truly critically about what they're doing. So I am encouraging them to be really challenged. And I might ask at the beginning of a coaching session, are you comfortable with challenge? On a scale of 1 to 10, how comfortable would you be? And so progressing through the first, second, and third coaching session to gradually turn up the dial on our conversation, increasing the level of challenge. And when people feel some discomfort, we continue to probe and challenge them. And the reason that we can do that is because we've established a relationship. Would they recognize we're on side? We are working for their interests, not against their interests. And it's also a confidential conversation. So with that relationship in place, we can be provocative, we can be challenging, we can hold them in places of discomfort. And the metaphor that I hold back to another mountain one is Warren Bennis, it's reputedly said, it's the storm that shapes the mountain. So how do we create a storm to enable that new insight to emerge, the learning to take place that allows the person to then say, I can step beyond the story into a new reality of who I am or new actions that I need to take.
For me, there's a huge bit that resonates there is trying to get into that deeper level of thinking, like you say, get behind that story. And that's where I see coaching. The other aspect there that you mentioned right at the beginning, Jonathan, was, and has always been my number one rule, if you like, for coaching, that is kind of my mantra going into it, is about being curious. Because if I'm about to go into a coaching session, what we'd always recommend is that, you don't go from a management meeting straight into a coaching session. You need a bit of a space to be mentally prepared as the coach. So give yourself that space. And then my philosophy, my sort of trigger in my own mind is like, be curious. Because if I'm curious, I'm going to listen empathically. I'm going to ask great questions. I'm going to unlock some aspects. So what level of importance do you place in terms of being curious within coaching?
So I think curiosity has a place, but curiosity not for our own sake, but curiosity for the sake of our client. Because I could say, oh, tell me a bit more about your colleague. And what I get is more of the story, the more of the story that they tell down the pub or in the coffee house to their friend. So I'm not interested in that story. What I'm interested in doing is unlocking, as you say, their understanding of who they are, understanding their system and the people who they're engaged with in their system. And so curiosity, not for my sake, oh, tell me more about that, but curiosity to help them shine a light on the places that they haven't looked. And in a way, I'm not tied into the outcome. And one of the things that I continually need to teach myself, because I think it's a challenge for me and it's a challenge for many coaches, is not to have a vested interest in the outcome. And certainly very new coaches, when you get them to report back on the work that they're doing, there's a sense of pride, like, wow, we had this great session and they had this fantastic, I was brilliant. And yes, of course, we want to listen, ask great questions, summarize, provide affirmations, reflections, all of the core skills. Yes, and that is a skill and it takes time to develop. But really, what we're doing is providing the space and the context for the client to do the work. So continually reminding myself that the success, or any success, is always the client's success. And at the same time, any failure or any inaction is also the client's failure or inaction. It's not, I provide the space, I bring myself, my skills, and there are days when I'm better than there are other days, of course, and I can reflect on that, I can take that to supervision. But giving the responsibility to the client for their action, the monkey sits on their back, not on mine.
Yeah, and I think that's so key. As coaches, it's about giving them the space to realise what they're going to do and give them the information from their own mind that they can make that choice going forward. I mean, you talked right at the start about sort of walking coaching and, out of the office coaching. How does that change the coaching session itself? How does that open the mind to different possibilities as well?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is there are different risks when you're outside in nature. The biggest risk, of course, is crossing the road. That you're engaged in the conversation, you're wrapped up in that moment, and you step out and maybe you haven't looked both ways and followed the green cross code. So simple things like that briefing at the beginning, being mindful of that as wherever you might be about safety issues. And if you're climbing a mountain, have you got the right shoes? Is the person fit enough to do that? Have you checked the weather? Have you checked the route? All of these sort of things. So there's a safety aspect that we often don't think about in the office. The second thing that I would say is the blue psychology of blue-green environments brings its own natural benefits to individuals, that when we feel the wind or breeze on our skin, or the sun on our faces, we're able to touch the grasses, all of that, or even if it's raining, all of that gives us a immediate positive benefit. And then alongside it, the coaching process, we're walking side by side. So that's great. We're often not engaged in eye contact with the individual. So one of the things I often notice is when I've asked a great question, the person usually breaks eye contact. Often there's a body movement that goes alongside that. You're both nodding away because you can relate to that.
Yeah.
And when we're outside, there isn't that demand to take in what's happening on the other person's face and all of that cognitive processing that goes on. So the person's free to think in a different way. And often the landscape provides us, because it's open fields, because we're walking by maybe a lake and we can see all the way across the lake, or we're on a mountain and we can see across the valley, it opens up the possibility of different things and also provides us with many opportunities for metaphors that if we're in a sterile meeting environment with four walls, a flip chart or a whiteboard, there are less opportunities to draw on that metaphor to look beyond the immediacy of the office. And one story that comes to mind as I'm talking, I did some work with a prison governor, and pretty difficult job being a prison governor. And this person always used to meet, we used to meet sometimes at the prison and sometimes adjacent somewhere close to the prison and have a meeting. And he would always turn up with a white shirt, perfectly ironed, and a big set of keys and black trousers. And he looked, well-built gentleman, muscular, just looked like a man who was in charge of the prison. And he had that persona that he brought into the coaching conversation. And so we were very rule bound. We were very focused on, this is the way we do things in the prison service. These are the things that you have to do. And so one of the times that I said to him, maybe we should do something different next time. Let's go meet at a National Trust property and have a walk around their rose gardens. So he's, a bit weird. Okay, we'll do that. He didn't think it was a bit weird, but looking at his face, I think he thought it was a bit unusual. So we met, we had a walk, and we had a completely different conversation. That he turned up in a t-shirt and a pair of jeans and a pair of sneakers. We walked round, and it was just a different person and a different conversation. That natural environment, the permission to step outside of a meeting room, to step outside of the identity that he had assumed as a prison governor. And we all assume identities. We all turn up of maybe our white t-shirt and our jacket and our white sneakers, or whatever it is, the identity that we have adopted for our work role. And taking that off and being who we are authentically. And we have many different things. I'm not suggesting this is an inauthentic role. I'm just saying we have a particular side that we present to work, and maybe a side we present to our friends down the pub or in the coffee house or at Pilates, and we have a different side that we present to our family. So stepping out allowed us to explore all of those dimensions as he reflected on the nature of his role, reflected much more critically about what was demanded of him in his role and how he could be different, how he potentially could change, and equally what the future might look outside of the prison service. So nature provides those opportunities that open up vistas to have very different conversations, to feel unfettered, to break free of the four walls of an office or a prison, our office prison.
That example is so powerful, because something we would encourage is almost that, get away from that mindset. You know, who says the coaching has to be done in a meeting room? You know, why not? We've got a lovely studio in Winnersh, and there's a nice field out the back, and it became a bit of a running joke. There's a huge log out there, and you go and sit on this log and you have a conversation, but you're in nature in it, because it takes you out of those four walls where you've been in that almost a fixed mindset of being in the office and looking at, I don't know, processes, systems, whatever it might be. You get out there in nature and it opens your mind up. The other aspect, just picking up from what you've said there, is that often as coaches we're taught to look at body language, facial expressions, look for eye contact. But when our clients also doing that, there may be times where they're reading the coach's body language and sometimes offering up, and I'm thinking maybe in a manager to employee scenario, the information they're going to give is what they think the manager wants to hear rather than the whole truth. So by removing or taking ourselves out of that closed environment and into a different scenario where we're coaching side by side, it gives a very different feel to the conversation. Before we move on to the sort of 3 leadership sound bites, what would be a typical coaching program, would you have 3 sessions with someone, 6 sessions, 10, 20? Is it an hour? Is it 5 hours? What does, give us a bit of a picture of what that would look like?
There was a time when I had a program and I would say, this is how it works. Now I'm much more flexible. So I'll meet the client where they want to meet them as frequently or as infrequently as they want, and to do a session as long as the client has got the time for that particular meeting for a session. As a broad guide, I would favour, if I'm meeting online, around about an hour. If I'm meeting somebody outside, so I'm travelling, they're travelling, about an hour and a half. If I'm working in nature, maybe a couple of hours would be quite good for us to go for a walk. We might not be coaching the whole time. We might be a little bit of chat, bit of safety in the car park. We'll then head off, might talk about how fantastic Tottenham Hotspur have been this season in winning a trophy. Sorry, I had to throw that in.
I agree.
Sorry for all you Arsenal listeners out there. Anyway, and so you build the relationship, then you have a bit of coaching, and then you have a bit of wind down. So maybe a couple of hours. And it might be that I'll meet that person once because what they want to do is prepare for a job interview next week. It may be that I meet that person over the course of a year and we'll have 12 coaching sessions. But as a broad guide, if you said, where's your starting point in your mind? 4 to 6 sessions. 4 to 6 sessions of an hour online.
Brilliant. I think that's great advice. And the reason I asked the question is that I think when people are starting out, they might be setting up their own business to become a coach, an executive coach, performance coach, whatever that might be. And these are the types of questions that we often get asked on the courses. So yeah, thank you. That's great advice.
I think it's beautiful that summing up and bringing sort of those 3 topics together before you talk about the leadership soundbite. So if we started talking about AI and we then started talking about outside coaching, and then we've ended with adapting to the person. And I think it's really beautiful now that coaching is really about those human connections, and that AI is starting to develop in a way that it's making us as coaches and us as human beings have better and more emotional conversations with people and build those human connections that are built around the people that are in front of us now, instead of that format of this is what coaching is and the program looks like ABC. So I think that's really fantastic and really reassuring for everyone.
Jonathan, we wrap up with our top 3 leadership sound bites. I'll say ours, yours, please. So, what are your top 3 tips that our listeners can take away from your coaching sort of knowledge, experience, and research?
So number 1, which I think is obvious, but we don't do it enough, is just listen more. Spend more time listening and listen beyond the words to the whole communication. Facial expressions, the eyes, hand movements, all of this give us a sense of what the person means, not just the words they're saying. So listen more is number 1. Number 2 on my list, given we are in 2025 and we've talked quite a lot about AI, I would say the future successful leaders are the leaders who are leveraging the power of AI to help them perform to the highest level and to the best quality. So not just consuming AI and regurgitating it, because if you're just simply regurgitating it, you can be replaced. Is how can you as the human add value to the AI content that's being created and be discerning in your application of that content that's created. So when to use it and when to edit and amend and change, so you add the human value to the content that's being created. And I think the third thing that I would say for leaders in particular is to encourage them to adopt a coaching style. So to spend less time directing and telling and more time asking questions. And once again, if you ask leaders, they will say, oh yeah, I'm such a great coach. And then you watch what they do, and they're such a great person at telling other people what to do. So just catching ourselves a little bit more frequently and saying, what am I doing here? Am I telling, or am I inviting that other person to share their perspectives? Now, we do need to set some boundaries in organizations. It isn't, you can play any sport you like. We're playing a particular sport. You have to play on the pitch. But within that, unleashing the talent in our organisations, in our team, to be the best versions of themselves.
Absolutely fantastic. And there's so much to take away in there. And for me, the message is around the power of coaching. And if it's something that we're not familiar with, get out there, read some of Jonathan's books and do more research around it and really understand it. Because when you get into the depths, when you lead with sort of ask first, tell later, we unpack and we explore and we give people that space, I think there's so much to be taken away from coaching. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you giving up your time and sharing that with our listeners. Thank you guys for listening as well. Thank you, Darren, as well. And don't forget to hit subscribe and leave some comments and let us know how you're getting on with your coaching. And we'll see you next time on Sound Leadership. The Sound Leadership podcast was produced by Media First. To learn more about the media crisis and communications training, visit mediafirst.co.uk. The editor and producer was Darren Wingham. The show was hosted, written and researched by me, Dan Boniface. A special thanks to all the team at Media First and the BCF Group for supporting the development of this podcast. To learn more about the management, leadership, training and coaching that the BCF Group offer, visit thebcfgroup.co.uk or get in touch by emailing hello@thebcfgroup.co.uk. Finally, a special thanks to our exceptional guest today, who you can contact via the BCF Group.